Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Earwax. I'm Colin, and today we're going to be doing a review of the brand new album by The Weeknd, Hurry Up Tomorrow. Alrighty, so this is the sixth full-length album from Canadian singer, songwriter, producer The Weeknd, whose real name is escaping me right now. I think it's Abel something, but I unironically have loved The Weeknd. Like pretty much everything that he's put out, I've been super into. He's one of the few what I would consider top 40 artists that I actually really enjoy listening to. I think it's an absolute crime that his last album did not get nominated for a Grammy. Again, not that I put a lot of clout into the Grammys. I don't, personally think that they matter all that much or that the selections are necessarily indicative of like what actually was good that year. But I do think him not being included was ridiculous, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. But with this album, Hurry Up Tomorrow, it does seem as he is kind of closing the chapter or closing the book on just The Weeknd in general, whether that's that moniker in particular, whether that's like this specific saga he set out to tell, especially with like the last three albums. And this album, it definitely feels like an end. It's very long, so buckle up if you are a fan of my reviews. Good news, because this is a long one. If you're not, I apologize, but there's 22, really 18 songs on the album, but 22 songs on the album, at least just like the standard edition that was released. So yeah, it's a lot to unpack, but overall, I did end up enjoying it. A couple places here and there that I wasn't a huge fan of. But we'll get into that as we start talking about the track list itself. I don't know. It's definitely, I think, one of the weakest albums in his discography or like main discography, but he's still incredibly talented, and so even when he's maybe not coming off on his strongest, it's still a very enjoyable listen. So without further ado, let's talk about the songs themselves. So the album opens up with a song called Wake Me Up, which is a pretty good just song title for the opening song of an album like this. I generally don't get too heavy into the lyrics, and like the few times that I do get sort of lyrical analysis going, I usually end up being wrong. But there's a couple points throughout this review and this album where I am going to talk about the lyrics, but for the most part, if you're familiar with like the last couple albums, you kind of know what this album is in the grand scheme of like the concept that he's been building, and all of the external sort of I'm not gonna call them stunts, but like the external publicity and themes that he's been doing along with these like past few albums, and this is clearly like a culmination of all of that. And this is like this opening track of Wake Me Up, great way to start it. It's got some production credits to Justice, and you can definitely hear a little bit of that like French house influence. It's very like 80s synthwave driven, synth pop driven, and you're gonna get a lot of that throughout this entire album. It starts with like this very standard like synth string intro, like not actually string instruments, but like a synthesizer used to kind of recreate the tones that you would get with string instruments. It works well. Again, it does set up the tone for the album very well, because you're going to be hearing these same like tones and just settings on whatever synthesizer him and his plethora of producers are using throughout this pretty regularly, because it happens a lot. The vocals here are crooning and they are good. I mean, he's always been an incredible singer, and that's kind of like what he's always been known for, is very classic like R&B pop style vocals with a more sort of electronic synth driven instrumentals backing that up, and you definitely get that right off the bat. The guitars do come in a little bit halfway through the song. They get a little bit funky. The drums here are fairly basic, but they're not bad for this particular style of pop, and definitely there's like moments of his vocal performance that give sort of like 80s Michael Jackson vibes, which is not, an insult by any means, because that, as many people agree, is like peak Michael Jackson. But yeah, it's there, even like towards the end of the song, the synths get a little bit more like dark and ominous, and it definitely is alluding to some of the lyrical themes, at least, that are going to come after this. Then it goes from there into Cry For Me, which has this sort of like crunchy and offbeat intro with very like standard 808s, hi-hats and snares for the drums, which you're going to hear a lot throughout this whole album. There's moments where the drums do get a little bit interesting, or like the drum machine, the beat does get a little bit interesting, but it's for the most part very standard. More of just like that 80s synth tone, more angelic vocals, which is, kind of his bread and butter, at least on this album. There's a little piano section about halfway through the song that does get a little bit like fun and interesting, but overall not much of a tonal shift from the opening track. But then it goes into I Can't Fucking Sing, which is just basically like a minute long sort of transition. I don't even want to call it a song, because it's like just like a sample, almost like a skit, but it's not a skit. It's got like just these interesting sort of like spoken word like backgrounds and this like kind of chaotic instrumentation. But then it goes straight into Sao Paulo, which I apologize if I absolutely butchered that pronunciation. But this is a fun song. So this was one of the singles that was released previous to the album. I don't know if it was the first or the second one, but it's got like this Latin borderline sort of dance hall vibe, but it's not. It's very almost like electro pop driven. The vocals here feel more of like a feature for the song as opposed to the driving force, which is what you get on a lot of Weeknd songs. Most of the song really just kind of feels like someone just playing around with an MPC, which is not a bad thing. I mean, like 12, 13 years ago, probably, I went down a deep hole into like Arab music and other MPC artists, so I definitely appreciate some of that flair being brought in. And then like towards like the halfway towards the end of the song, it does get into like this sort of like darker, almost like dark wave synth attributed like parts, which it ties off really nicely for like the more like dance oriented direction that this song is going. I can imagine this song being remixed like a million times. I'm sure it's already been remixed a few times, but it's got a very good groundwork for like something that I think a lot of other DJs or producers could take and then just do their own thing off of. And then after that is Until We're Skin and Bones, which the whole thing just feels like the build up to a drop in like an EDM song. Like it's just constantly like ascending and going, higher and higher, more intense, more intense, more intense. But then it doesn't actually like drop into the next song. It kind of just ends. And the next song starts off very, very soft, which is Baptized in Fear. Not soft in a bad way. It's just like for the intensity that the previous like transition was kind of bringing in, I expected something to start off a little bit more of a bang. But you get more of like that 80s sort of dark synthwave vibe. A little bit more of like horror aesthetics. Like I get some like 80s like horror soundtrack aesthetics in this a lot. The flow here, at least from the vocals, a little bit more R&B than pop, which I know The Weeknd is technically more of like an R&B singer, but he's always kind of flirted between R&B and pop styles pretty seamlessly. But this song is a good song. I love the instrumentation here. The drums are still pretty basic, but they do work. There's like a really deep low tempo bass that's kind of driving the song forward that is really interesting. And then it sets up into the next song very, very well, which is Open Hearts. And Open Hearts is just like a straight up electro vibe. It's got probably like my favorite instrumentals on the entire album. They're pulsing, they're driving, super dancey. This is the type of electronic music that I absolutely love. The vocals here work super well. Again, more on the kind of R&B side, but definitely have some of that synth pop, electro pop feel to them. And yeah, this whole song is just an absolute vibe. I love it so much. This one has immediately gone on a couple of my playlists, and I will be listening to it pretty extensively throughout the year. It's got some, again, very similar like synth tones and sounds as to what was previously been used on the album, but they're used sparingly enough here that it doesn't feel repetitive or boring. And it's just like it's just a fun song. Like if I was at the club, which I don't really go to clubs anymore, but hypothetically if I was and this song came on, I would absolutely go hard. It's probably my favorite song on the entire album. But then after that, we get into opening night. And opening night feels like the start of the second third of this album. So by my third listen of this album, it was pretty clear, at least to me, that like tonally, this was broken up into three different sections. First section very much just like an intro, sort of like setting the tone for like where this album and where this journey is going. Very like similar as far as the sounds go, and a little bit more uplifting in a couple of the tracks. Definitely more of like the dance vibe. This middle third is more of like the hip hop, borderline introspective part of the album, and I'm going to get into like a couple lyrical themes here, but not too much. But this definitely starts that off. It opens up with like this like dial-up tone that kind of then goes into a more of like a standard hip hop like drill or trap beat. It's got this kind of like wind chime synth tone to it. Vocals are a bit more restrained. Really just does feel like an opening, ceremony for a show or concert, which again kind of gets into what the next few songs like talk about, starting with Reflections Laughing. So this is an interesting song. It starts off with this almost like acoustic guitar kind of vibe with the instrumentation. And then like some other, light synths and light bass come through. Random like space lasers kind of going off, which is just super weird. The vocals here are mediocre. They're not amazing. The chorus is again very like pretty restrained. But then about halfway through the song, there's like this phone call, like recorded voicemail type thing of some like woman talking about, are you okay? Checking in on him. Like, I know things have been tough. And then it goes from that into this weird like hip hop second half of the song that feels like just such a tonal shift from the first half. It's got this kind of like rap call feature that's just not my like personal style. I think it's a feature. So there's a number of features on this album. A few of them I can like point out, but they're all uncredited. I know like Future, Travis Scott, I think Lana Del Rey, I believe Florence Welch from Florence and the Machine is also either on this song or like one of the next couple songs. It's interesting. It's not bad by any means. It's just a weird shift from like the first half of this song. But then from there, it goes into Enjoy the Show, which is more just like straight up hip hop. It's got some hip hop features on it. That super like high pitched falsetto sort of like backing harmony that you hear in a lot of like late 90s, early 2000s hip hop. They kind of do a little bit of a callback here or there. Not my favorite thing in the world, but it's at least like subtle enough that it doesn't annoy the hell out of me. There's definitely some like lyrical allusions in this to like past struggles with substance abuse or self-medicating. I know for the most part, I think The Weeknd only like drinks and maybe like smokes weed anymore. I don't think that he still is doing things that makes him can't feel his face, which is ironic because whoever has the rap feature on this opens with the line, "I can't feel my face anymore," which is certainly a choice. It's a little on the nose, but it's fine. Again, not my favorite feature. It's just not my style of hip hop, but I'm sure there's people out there who do genuinely really enjoy this. From there, it gets into Giving Up on Me, which is another like more hip hop beat as opposed to like the more electronic, like synthwave driven beat. I do actually like this one more than the previous couple of tracks. It is a little bit more nuanced. There's some more intricacies to it that I do think elevated it beyond just like the simple 808 drum and snare and hi-hat that we've been like hearing so far. It's not super unique, but it is still fairly solid. The vocals here are good. But again, they're good across the entire album. Like that's not necessarily anything new. And then this has like a really weird sample in the middle of it. That again, another time where it shifts the tone a little bit in the song, more so even than the one a couple tracks back. This one really felt like it should have been two songs because after the sample, it's a more like piano driven, almost like lo-fi kind of beat, which I do really like. Again, it's very different from like the first half of the song, and having that like sample in the middle that just completely changes the shift and like tone of the album or the song is a little bizarre, but I do like the second half. I think it's well done, and I like anytime anyone's even like flirting with lo-fi, so that was cool. After that is I Can't Wait to Get There. This feels like a classic sort of like 90s or even like 80s R&B. It's got some funk, it's got some soul in it, very sparingly, but it does add some nice variety to the album at this point. And then from there we get into Timeless. So Timeless was the other like single I had heard prior to this album coming out. This one I believe one of the main producer credits on it is Pharrell. And there's some other, like, I think rap features on this. I don't know if it's Future or Travis Scott, but I think it's one of them. It's not my song. It's just not my style of, hip hop or like even R&B that I really enjoy listening to. It's fine. The beat here is pretty basic in my opinion. There's nothing super interesting or exciting about it. The feature is just, again, not my style of hip hop. Just like that over auto-tuned like rap singing, like it's just not my jam. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is probably one of the weakest tracks on the album, honestly, which is surprising. Like they chose it to be the feature, but I guess, with producer credits like this and like whoever the rap feature is on this, that's probably very popular. I get why they wanted to like push this one out as a single. It's just not for me. And then we get into Niagara Falls, which is, I don't know, more of those like falsetto vocal hooks, more super basic, just like 808, snare and hats. There's nothing exciting about this song to me. Even like the vocals here, I feel are pretty weak. The ending has this like off-tempo sampling, and it's just not good. Like the outro is just pretty bad on this song, honestly. But then luckily after this, it's Take Me Back to LA, which is more of like that 80s synthwave vibe. And again, it's not super different from what we got like on the beginning of the album, but after like the last few songs that I just like wasn't feeling a whole lot, it was nice to kind of get back into parts of the album that I was enjoying up until this point. But even with that, like the first couple minutes of this song don't have much variety, and it definitely is lacking a little bit of the excitement that I felt on like a couple of the tracks of the front part of the album. After that, though, is Big Sleep. And this is the song that I was the most excited about when I was reading through the producer credits, because one of the feature producers on here is electronic music legend Giorgio Moroder. And if you don't know who Giorgio Moroder is, he's one of like the originators of just electronic music in general. Like, I mean, you could put him up there with like Kraftwerk and a couple of those other bands from like the 70s that were like really driving what ended up becoming dance music, and especially like in the 80s. And you can definitely hear his influence on this track with like the sort of like deep but recessed bass, the more like playful, almost cinematic synth lines, the way that the song kind of unfolds. It's very, very similar to like some of his early work. The vocals here are light and floaty, and they just fit so well over the instrumentation. I do like this song a lot. It's very restrained. It's not like the most upbeat or like danceable song, but it's got some just like classic old school electronic vibes to it that I absolutely love. Then we get into Give Me Mercy, which is probably another one of my absolute favorite songs on the album. Back into the more sort of like danceable, uplifting, upbeat vibes that we're getting a little bit on the beginning of the album. I still think the instrumentation could be a bit more like varied or interesting, but I still really like this song. The chorus is super catchy. The vocals are just, they fit super well over this. And the tempo, even though it's like very danceable, it's like almost like a slow dance kind of, and I think it works super well. After that is going to be Drive, which it's a fine song. It's back to just like the really simple like snare and hi-hat of like the 808. The vocals here are somewhat more inspired than like a couple of the songs that I've heard up to this point, but definitely not a standout track for me. But it's fine. It's a good song. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Then we get into The Abyss, and The Abyss has got this more like kind of almost theatrical piano intro to it. And then there's like a little bit of a bouncy sort of like playful synth buildup, but it takes about halfway through the song for any sort of like beat or percussion to come in. And when it does finally come in, it's still fairly uninspired. Like there's nothing super exciting about it, which is, again, not inherently a bad thing. I mean, I don't know. If you guys have watched enough of my videos now, I get really excited about drums. And so when the drums or the beat is not like super interesting, it definitely takes me out of the immersion of the album and being like engrossed into like all the different, tones and sounds I can pick out of it. And then this is the one feature that I did, or at least was able to like kind of pinpoint, which was Lana Del Rey, who I'm not a huge Lana Del Rey fan. I think she's very good at what she does. It's just not my particular brand of pop music. And I think, the one thing I will say about this feature is that at least it gives something a little bit different to this song that we haven't heard up until this point. But it also just seems a little unnecessary. Like it seems almost like an afterthought right at the end of the song, and not like utilized as well as I think as it could have been. From there, we get into the last few songs on the album, starting with Red Terror. Now, I do really love these instrumentals. They feel very scattered and a little all over the place, which I think is kind of cool. The drums and the synths are not like as seamless as a lot of the instrumentation has been up until this point. Even if like the actual sounds and tones are pretty much the same, the way that the delivery is kind of almost off-putting, it definitely brings some excitement and variety that I've been missing sorely on this album for the most part. The vocals here like are him pretty much just belting his heart out on every single line, which I think works super well. And even if we weren't like over an hour into this album at this point, because this album it's a long, it's like I think an hour and 24 minutes roughly runtime. This song definitely feels like you're kind of reaching the end, like the climax of something. When an album is giving you like clues as to where you are in the journey, just based off like the tone and the sounds that you're experiencing. The spoken word sort of like outro on this is a little bit on the nose, but it doesn't come off as cheesy. Like I do think it works fairly well. And then we get into Without a Warning, and I do think the transition between Red Terror and Without a Warning could have been done better, but this is a fine song. It's got some classic, just like Weeknd vibes to it. Like this really feels like a classic Weeknd song, which is good that like he's ending with. I mean, not that like most of this album doesn't feel that way, because it definitely does, but this one it just kind of was nice to sit back and sort of vibe to. The sample though of like the crowd in the background with the lyrics talking about like the crowd, again, a little on the nose. It is a little cheesy, but it not in like a stupid way. Like it does kind of work. But again, the instrumentals here, they do just feel a bit recycled. Nothing super exciting about it. But luckily we're almost done with the album at this point, with the last song being the title track, Hurry Up Tomorrow. I do like that he ended with the title track. I think it leads to this whole concept of like this being like the end of a chapter, but like not the end for him, and being excited to see what comes next. The instrumentation here is fun. It's a little bit different. Definitely feels like a good just like closing track on an album. Definitely some of my favorite like instrumentals. Piano here mixed in with a kind of almost like video game-esque synths are really well done. The vocals here are super strong as well, and it's just like a good fitting close to what is probably like the end of the chapter in his life of being The Weeknd. So overall, it's a pretty epic album, just as far as like scale and length and like the themes that he's tackling in this. Do I think it needed to be this long? No. Do I think there was a couple tracks that probably could have been cut out? Yes, but if you like listen to the lyrics and where the journey is like kind of going on this, I get why every song is on this album. And there's even like a deluxe edition that I didn't listen to a review that's got like 2 extra songs, but it's a lot. It's a long album. There's a lot to it, and I think if he had trimmed some of the fat, maybe like did a little bit different in a couple places with some of the instrumentation, maybe experimented with some of the tempos and some of the drum sampling, or like drum tones in general, it could have just been that much better. But that being said, there were some songs on here I absolutely loved. Some I didn't, but that's okay. And overall, it was a pretty pleasant listening experience. So I'm going to go with the B- on this one. Again, I think there was definitely some room for improvement, but overall, fun experience. So that's going to be it for me, guys. Thanks so much for sticking with me, watching it all the way to the end. If you've listened to this album, let me know what you think down in the comments. If you haven't, go check it out. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff helps my channel out a lot. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.